that money run on down the line. See that money run on down the line.
We're in the McLeod Plantation.
We're on McLeod Plantation.
What am I looking at?
Well, I tell you, you picked a good spot.
Uh-huh.
Right in front of us is the back of the kitchen. And all that good food that people come to Charleston for, that food came out of those kitchens.
Okay.
Those women who would bring their knowledge of sweet potatoes and cooking and spices with them to change the lives of so many people, not to mention feed people as well.
Right.
Their story starts there.
So these two structures are both kitchens?
That's the kitchen. This is the cold
Okay.
storage dairy that we're looking at on this side.
really? Yeah.
And in 1860, the enslaved people here churned out 600 pounds of butter in that
Wow.
cold storage dairy, which would subsequently get rolled down this waterway we're going down
Uh-huh.
to the market of Charleston and be sold.
Really? Okay. What was the major kind of crop at this plantation?
Sea Island cotton.
Cotton.
Sea Island cotton.
I didn't think we did much cotton here.
Some of the rarest in the world, and it was quite laborious. So people would start early with that cotton, not go to bed till very late at night, particularly when it was time to get it to market. And the gin house, which we're going to look at, is where people would spend that time pulling that cotton, long, luxurious fibers, cleaning out the seeds and getting it prepared. They would bale it down into very large bags. Those bags would go down that waterway and take it to market in Charleston, and it would end up overseas for processing.
Wow.
So in many ways, this water is the key for so many reasons. The 74 to 100 souls who would live here, sometimes find love here, and certainly die here, came up this waterway. They came from as far away as Senegal all the way down to Angola, and they did not forget who they were. They brought their heritage, their pride, their family, their memories. They brought all of that with them when they came.
70 plus people?
74
live.
to 100,
And of that, how many were enslaved?
all of them,
Wow.
every single one of them.
So it's a rather large kind of community on the plantation.
For this size it is, and they would form what we know now as the Gullah Geechee community. And that community would be what would take care of people when they arrived. When they first got here, they were shell-shocked, had no idea, didn't even speak the language. So when they got here, there would be people who they might have heard a word or two from a village who would embrace them and try to get them acclimated to what life would be like here.
Wow. How long did they have enslaved people on this property?
Going back as early as the 1700s.
Really?
People were here. It's an interesting thing because these were always fields and people would always be working these fields. It just was in the hands of different people.
Right.
By 1850, things would change dramatically with the family that would arrive here. They would in fact make this property far more viable through achievements in flooding and agriculture and irrigation. And that was due in part to the knowledge of the enslaved who would bring an understanding of how the moon impacted the tides, which would help the
Interesting.
fields be irrigated far more. So the cotton was successful because of the knowledge that they brought with them.
Interesting. Wow.
It's a very interesting thing about the people who got off those ships, those 74 to 100. They would settle along the Sea Islands, and they would become what we now know as the Gullah Geechee community. Being 3 generations away, that makes me a proud Gullah girl. And I would give anything for 15 more minutes with my grandmother because I realize now she was speaking to me in Gullah when I was a little girl. And I don't remember. But
So, the word Gullah, where does it come from?
well, different thoughts. The Gullah River in Angola is
Okay.
one. There is another reference to it of a river in Sierra Leone. I generally talk about it as being the framework of both the language, the culture, all of that good food that people love when they come to Charleston, the faith, the worship. It is a broader umbrella. I think of it in that framework of everything that people find when they come here to Charleston.
And then on the Geechee side, so
Geechee, often referencing Georgia. But when you say Gullah Geechee, people understand you're referencing a very special place, very special people, and what they left behind. And it continues to evolve. The Gullah culture is still very, very much alive to this day.
interesting. It's mostly the Sea Islands, though.
The Sea Islands.
From, say, North Carolina all the way down
All
to
the way down.
to Florida or wherever.
Exactly.
What are some of the manifestations that we would see of the Gullah Geechee culture in today's?
Well, one of them still continues to touch our lives, and that is in the way we say goodbye and honor people
Oh yeah.
in our funeral services, in the way that we don't mourn the death. We celebrate the life. That comes out in our services. This is a cemetery across the street, and there are 100 remains that are there now. Oftentimes, slave masters would allow people from other plantations to come and say goodbye. It was quite an elaborate process, heartfelt. It's truly one of the things that we owned. And so saying goodbye then marked the beginning. One of the things that we believe, one of the Gullah beliefs, is if you're buried near water, it helps your journey home. And for an enslaved person, if you can't be free in life, at least I can be free in death.
Did the enslaved folks from different plantations, did they tend to have interactions
As
between one
much as
plantation as the other?
yes, they did.
Was it communal church services or?
Not so much communal church, but the drivers who went from plantation to plantation would bring back news about how people were doing.
Right.
And that was really pivotal. And they did keep in touch with each other. One of the more difficult components of that is in how they maintained families. There were fathers who would leave their plantations knowing that they were going to get a beating, a whipping, severely when they got back. They'd go see their children. They would go and spend time with their wives. They maintained family as much as possible, even though it meant severe suffering on the other side. After the war, we know that many people put ads in the newspapers looking for their family members after the time of freedom. And the Freedmen's Bureau, which was stationed here at McLeod, helped in that process. The Freedmen's Bureau was a group, an institution, organization that was settled here in many other parts that was designed to help formerly enslaved people get up on their feet, food, medicine, and clothing. But what they managed to do was set forth an agenda for the formerly enslaved, and they did a Herculean task. Given how little they had, they helped bring families together, they helped set up those first schools, and they were actually right here at McLeod Plantation.
In South Carolina, when it was colonized, it wasn't really colonized for the same reasons in the Northeast. It was religious persecution. This Charleston story is very much feels like a business. It's all about making money or whatever. The Lord proprietors were given this area, and then, so then the enslavement felt like it came as an extension of how do we make money.
There's no question. And in looking at that piece of it too, the connection for Charleston and Barbados is another interesting piece of this story, because that is what in fact brought some of those early planters here. They were looking for space to expand and people to grow, and of course that would be the enslaved people who would bring all their knowledge with them. Everything they learned, everything they did to make planters wealthy, they didn't learn it in the hulls of those ships. They brought it with them, which means they were already doing it back home. So this waterway would be pivotal, both for those souls who would come here. If we were to go to the ride, we'd end up back downtown in the harbor of Charleston. If we were to go 3 months more, 8 to 12 weeks, depending on weather conditions, then we would end up on the west coast of Africa. After the period of enslavement, people would take their fruits and vegetables downtown, sell them door to door in Charleston, and then come back here. That's for many people who lived in McLeod after that time frame. When we think about this water, we also think about it as an escape point for a man named William Dawson and 9 others who left McLeod in 1862. We think that they went to the left, went around the Stone, ended up at Folly, where they presented themselves to the Union. They would have been considered contraband, so they would not have been returned to McLeod.
Contraband meaning that they were basically war spoils or something like that?
In effect, yes,
Yeah, so
exactly.
Okay.
And they had a measure of protection as a result. William would go on to serve 2 terms, and his 3rd wife would get his pension. I'm so honored that we now know his descendants, and they have come to McLeod to hear a little bit about their story. The one thing that intrigues me is they took a lady with them named Rose. Rose had a 14-month-old baby, and I wonder whatever happened to her. How did she survive with a baby in the midst of all that? But it also tells us how bad things were that they would risk leaving at that time.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the messy parts of living in the lowcountry. It's so beautiful on one level.
And then there's the horror on the other.
Absolutely.
Exactly. they made the courageous decision
Yeah.
to tell the story this way.
Right.
And I always applaud that.
Yeah.
But just my own sense is sometimes there's a little bit of discomfort about what kind of a place this is. How do we manage this?
Yeah.
How do we, so we've been able to have a lot of say, and shout out to Sean Halifax.
Yeah.
Because Sean is
Sean's
like,
been great so far in this
he
process with
just
me.
gets it.
Mm-hmm.
And he will move every single obstacle
Yeah.
to make sure that we're able to tell the story
Yep.
with dignity and with honor, with an understanding of the fact that we are walking on the blood, sweat, and tears. And he treasures that, and he has given us, empowered us to be able to talk about that so candidly. And I think that that's one of the reasons that McLeod is so special.
Yeah.
It is a memorial to what they left, but it is also a chance for us to have difficult conversations, not as enemies, not against each other, but as people coming to a park to walk and stretch and to figure out this last path, which is
Yeah.
this path to freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Could have those conversations here, and I think it makes McLeod so special. We are approaching one of the most popular sites, the Wisdom Tree.
Okay.
She's a beauty. Between 300 and 500 years old.
Wow, she's huge.
She's huge. It's a live oak, so there are no rings as they hollow out as they get older. But this tree is so special. She has seen so much. She
Right.
would have seen those Africans coming across the waterway. She would have seen the folks in the field. She would have seen the enslaved children playing. She is an interesting marker. And when we talk about her, sometimes some very interesting conversations happen right here.
Right.
People will begin to feel a little bit lighter about being here, and they'll start to unburden themselves. And I've had so many poignant confessions. One man in particular, I'll never forget him. He said, "I want to tell you something after everybody leaves." And I thought, oh no, what's going to happen? And the group left, and he stood there with his daughter, and she was crying. And he said, "I want you to know I was one of the worst racists in my town." He said, and I blessed my ex-wife because she worked on me. And I said, why is your daughter crying? And she said, because I would have never come to a place like this, because I wouldn't have wanted to hear a story like this from someone who looked like you. And so this was pre-corona. We gave each other a big hug.
Yeah.
And we talked about the value of coming to this place, that you can have conversations like this with people who are different and leave feeling a little bit more, well, maybe healed. My hope, my colleagues, is that McLeod would be that place of healing in addition to a place of memorial for all those souls who died here. And this tree bears witness to all of that. If only she could talk.
If only she could talk. Well, then now the burden's on you to tell the stories.
It is, but it's one that I treasure, because when I think about their journey down this path to freedom, it is filled with gratitude. All of the things that they did not get came to me. So if I can rep them, as these young folks say,
Right.
with dignity and honor, and continue to show people what they left us, then that's a job well done. And I can only do that because of what they didn't do.
I love that. That's good.
Don't make me cry, Sam. Makeup.
It's funny, these trees, I mean, the oaks here, I mean, we have the Spanish moss.
Yes.
You also, it's almost like it's a planter on top of these things.
It
You
is.
have so many things growing on top of the...
It's true. And this moss is so critical because, we call it Spanish moss. It's neither Spanish nor moss. It's an epiphyte, an air plant. And for those strong women who lived here, they would have used this stuff to make the floor a little bit softer. They would have used this to help with their monthly menstrual cycle. They used this to pack wounds. And before we said goodbye to her, my grandmother wore it in her shoes for years because it was thought to bring down high blood pressure and cholesterol. Don't look for that in the Journal of American Medicine. It's not there. So these are things that intrinsic connection to nature, still very, very African. They brought it with them. Remember, they brought everything with them.
No.
And when we think about this tree being so old, this oak alley, these trees were planted in 1920 when the house was changed. So this oak alley and this oak alley. And I always reference that because people
Sorry,
ask
are you
us
calling it an oak alley?
an oak alley.
Alley, not alley.
Alley.
Okay.
Yes, the fancy French, oak alley.
Gotcha.
People ask, and it's a hard question, were people hung from these trees? We can't definitively say yes or no, but it's not likely these trees, they were planted in 1920. If it happened, and we don't have any oral testimony to back it up, would be this tree over here, which I call the face tree, or this one here. So we're searching, but we don't have any documentation that any lynchings occurred here at McLeod. But then we're limited into how far we can go back. That's a tough one. That's a tough one. I'm very proud to be able to tell our story.
Yeah.
Because for so long we were told your stories don't matter, they don't count, it's made up. It's taken us a while as Black people to not be afraid. And there were always people who were doing it quietly.
Right.
Now there are so many more storytellers standing together. And shout out to my colleagues across the country who do this, because the emotional toil, it's a lot. There are some days when I just go home and cry. And then I move on because I have to come back here because they could not take a day off.
Yeah.
And so I draw strength from what they left us, from those women who continue to be women, who continue to take care of people, from those who tried to make a difference, who dared to learn to read and to write, and who found the strength.
Was it? They weren't allowed to?
No. And even years later, they still struggled with that. I want to show you something. I know we won't get to cover this. This is a letter from a lady named Renda Bouknight. You see, it's dated 1932. She's writing back to Willie because she needs him to identify her. So we've calculated she was probably trying to get state benefits in New York.
Oh, right.
Social Security would kick in 3 years later. So she pours her heart out to him in her best English, trying to get him to remember that she washed clothes for his mother here. And that her little kids played with his little sisters. And she basically begs him.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty, funnily, it's easy, but...
It's all phonetic. Yes.
Yeah, because it is phonetic, that's right, yeah.
She's trying to get him to remember.
Right, I was living on McLeod Place 20 years ago.
This is the part that gets me. I write to ask you to help me. I need you to put in your own handwriting, identify me.
Yeah, there it is.
Get some white people down south who can say I am who I am so that I can get these benefits. That's what she's asking this man.
Right, yeah.
At 76, she's got to come back here.
That's interesting.
And so what we're trying to figure out is, why did he keep this letter? Did he pull it out at dinner parties to laugh at her? Did he actually help her? What happened to her? I found her in the census the other day.
Oh, did you?
She got married, she had a family, but did she ever get those benefits? Here she is. That's Anna Ravenel.
Oh, really?
Real person.
Yeah.
And that, you just asked me about the interpretive piece. Part of it is bringing the story forward into modern times. It didn't just end.
Right.
And she went on to have a family. So my hope is that one day I could find a great-great-grandson so I could give them this letter. And I can tell them that their grandmother stood up for herself. And she was her own best advocate with what little education she had. And that it mattered. It mattered. That's the power of McLeod.
So, Toby, tell me a little bit about this.
We're now, the Slave Street.
Slave Street.
And
Transition Row?
Transition Row. This is where those 74 precious souls, 74 to 100, would have lived with their families in these cabins. Now, there were 23 of them originally. We see the others on the maps. We can't quite figure out what happened to them, if they burned down, they fell in a state of disrepair. So we treasure these, which date back to about the 1850s. And you would have had multiple families living in these, even amidst long hours of work and terrible outcomes, they still retained family. And so the community then did life together.
Right.
And they held on to each other. And in trying to understand why family was so critical, it was a one stable element. Moms and dads did work to raise their kids, to prepare them for one day a future when they would not be enslaved anymore. We know that they gave their kids every single thing they had, and it would take place often late at night when everybody got in the house from the fields, from working, when the kids would be resting. It would be family time, and that was very, very precious. This particular cabin that I want to share with you, a beautiful woman by the name of Mrs. Gethers. She was born here in 1945, and she left this cabin. She went down to Burke High School, which is our only remaining black high school on the peninsula, and began to get her education. She also went beyond that and became what we would call kind of like a home health nurse. Ironically, in the 70s, she got a call to come back here to take care of the former owner. He was sick. And she has told us in her oral testimony that she thought anybody who lived in a house that big had to be God. But when she met him, she realized he was just an old, sick man, and so she stayed here and took care of him. And they developed a friendship, and she rented several of these cabins from him. This one she turned into a church. And I want you to come inside.
Yeah.
And if you look up on the wall, you'll see the scriptures that meant so much to her. Let me have you come on in. You see up on the wall, so she would have her pulpit in here. She would have chairs. She would have signs on the wall. She also would give away food and clothing. She was trying to change the atmosphere. Her ministry was called the Children of God, and it lasted until about 1986, just 4 years before the owners died and everything would change here. She is still living.
Oh, wow.
She's still living to this day, and not long ago I had an opportunity to meet someone who used to ride his bike down here to get the food that she would give away. She left an incredible legacy of love and forgiveness, and she's a very, very special lady. She also had, this will make you laugh, do you see this orange on the stairs?
Yes.
You remember in the 70s, everybody had shag orange rugs?
Right.
This is the remnants of her rug that was here.
Yeah.
She would have a radio playing, transistor radio with good old gospel music. There would
Right.
be chairs everywhere out here, and people would come and she would deliver an encouraging word to them.
Okay.
She was determined to make a difference, and she did.
She did.
One other thing I'd like to show you,
Let's see it.
since we're so close. Do you see behind that white sign right there? Come a little
Yes.
closer. That is,
Something that looks like an outhouse.
that's what it is.
Was it?
And that was for everybody along this row.
Lord.
And I understand that outhouses were unique across this country, our grandparents,
Right.
but they were still using this in 1990. And the highway is right there. And it
Yeah.
hurts.
Oh, man.
It hurts to think about that they
Yeah.
were still here. And in many ways, it's as though time stood still here. Tremendous things were going on just across the bridge. But here, not yet. That would come later. So this is why I say, whatever is left of this path, we've got to walk it. And we've got to walk it together.
Well, thank you, Toby. It's a gorgeous history, the way you tell it.
Thank you.
But it's hard.
It is, but it's necessary.
There's so much more to explore, and we want you to join us on The Good Road.
For more in-depth content, meet us on the internet at thegoodroad.tv.
Hear more great stories, connect to organizations, and make sure you download our podcast, Philanthropology.